Many of you know Jim Lehrer from his years as a news anchor and commentator on PBS. Some of you may also know him from his novel. He has written 20. And anyone who has paid a moment's notice to presidential politics in the last few decades also will know him as the guy who, ever polite and calm, manages to ask the tough questions that candidates for president need to be asked. How lucky we are in this election year to have Jim with us to talk about what has become a staple of American political life, the televised presidential debate. No one has moderated more debates than Jim Lehrer. He's done, I think, 10 or so at last count? 11. And no one does it better. Tension City is the story of his experience with these debates. It is part history, part memoir, part journalism. With a reporter's keen insight and a novelist's flair for telling a story, Jim brings readers behind the scenes to experience presidential debates from what he calls the middle seat occupied by the moderator. He covers some of the more memorable moments of candidate fumbles and faux pas, but perhaps more important, reminds us that for all of the stagecraft involved in politics these days, and in spite of the extensive image making that goes on in presidential campaigns and the control exerted by the candidates' teams and the industry that supports them, the debates still give us an important lens through which to examine those running for the highest office in the land. Please join me in welcoming Jim Lehrer.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. Anytime a group of people gather on a Saturday afternoon in the interest of the written word, it is a great event. And I have two personal things. First of all, let me tell you about politics and prose. I have written a lot of books, and I've been to politics and prose more or less pretty close to opening publication date. And the last count was 14 of my books I've been there, and it is Kate's and my wife is also a novelist, and she's been there for all of her books. And in addition to that, Politics and Prose is our personal bookstore. We don't live that far from Politics and Prose. In other words, Politics and Prose is a part of our lives personally as well as professionally, and I'm so delighted that they are participating and have always participated in this marvelous event at Gaithersburg. Now let me say, how many of you all are actually from Gaithersburg? Let me tell you why that gives me great pleasure. I've been to Gaithersburg a lot more times than you would think, as somebody who actually lives in Northwest DC. But I have come to Gaithersburg many times to the fairgrounds. You know where the fairgrounds are, okay? I've come for two reasons: national antique advertising shows and railroad memorabilia shows. The best in the country are I guess there still are. I haven't seen any lately, but for years and years and years, I would come to the gate, and that was before there was 370 or any of that. I would drive up 270 and come to the fairgrounds. Now, why did I do that? Well, because I'm a collector of bus memorabilia. Bus, B-U-S, I'm a motor coach, you know, that kind of stuff. And that comes from the fact that I grew up in the bus business, and I've written, and I'm going to get to the point here. There is a point here beyond Gaithersburg, because my bus history, family history, has, see, there's a train, see? I love that sound. You know, I grew up in little town, I'm digressing here terribly. I grew up in little towns in Kansas and Texas, and the sound of a train coming through was the sound of escape. You say, one day I'm going to get on that damn train and I'm going to get out of here. Well, the same thing applied to buses. And the bus come down, you know, and I lived in these little tiny places, and the bus would come right down the center of town, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyhow, the reason this relates to my books and to this event is that in the 1950s, I was going to a little junior college in South Texas, a place called Victoria, halfway between Houston and Corpus Christi. Anybody here ever heard of Victoria, Texas? Hey, terrific. Halfway between Houston and Corpus Christi, Corpus as it's called. And I went to a little junior college, and at night I worked as a ticket agent in the Continental Trailways bus depot. And I wrote a novel based on that experience called White Widow. We're up to 7 now. It's about a bus driver in the 1950s, drives for Trailways between Houston and Corpus Christi, and he spends a lot of time in Victoria. This is fiction now. This bus driver had a mad love affair with a beautiful woman passenger that rode his bus all the time between Victoria and Corpus Christi. But the problem is, the love affair was only in his imagination. The passenger was real, but his love, he never spoke with her, but he just admired her, and he had this love affair. But it ended up having real world ramifications. Anyhow, I wrote the novel. So when you go, after you write a book, as you all, I'm sure, are aware, writing the novel and getting the book published is just the beginning. Then you've got to go door to door, selling, hi, I just wrote a book, will you buy it, that kind of thing. And you go to great places like Politics and Prose and the Gaithersburg Book Festival and other places around the country selling a book. And it always helps when you're out on a book tour. I just came back from a book tour that started in September for this debate book. I mean, I can't believe it. But that's neither here nor there. But it's good to have something to do, something to say at a bookstore, or in my case, a public television station or whatever, to have a gig, in other words. Well, for White Widow, in order to show that I was authentic, that I knew what I was talking about when I wrote about the Continental Trailways buses and Continental Trailways bus depots and drivers and ticket agents in the 1950s in Texas, I went around the country demonstrating one of my duties as a ticket agent. Here's what I would do. I would call a bus. May I have your attention, please? This is your last call for Continental Trailways, 8:10 p.m. Silverside air-conditioned through-liner to Houston. Now leaving from lane 1 next to the building for Inez, Edna, Ganado, Louise, El Campo, Pierce, Wharton, Hungerford, Kendleton, Beasley, Rosenberg, Richmond, Sugar Land, Stafford, Missouri City, and Houston. All aboard! Don't forget your baggage, please. And they loved me in bookstores all over the country. Well, I'm here today to talk about Tension City, and there is no gig like that. Tension City, let me first of all tell you where the title comes from. One of the things that I was able to do, in addition to having my experience moderating these 11 debates since 1988, I also had the real privilege, and I'm talking about a real privilege, over a period of 20 years of sitting down and having one-on-one interviews with just about all of the people who were nominees for president and vice president and who appeared in a televised presidential debate. Not just the ones, and I interviewed them about their experience. Not only their experience with particular debates, but also their overall experience with the debates. And so the book is not just about my experience, it's what they had to say. And that's where the title came from. When I first started working on this book, it was about 2.5, 3 years ago, and when I had the blank screen on the computer, and I wrote the title, and the title was Moderator by Jimmy Charles Wawa, whatever. And for 2.5, 3 years, that was the working title in the book. And finally, we got to the what they used to call in the business the lead phase. In other words, where they send it to get it printed. And my editor at Random House, a man, very distinguished editor, had been an editor on 8 of my books, called me and he said he lives in New York. I was in Washington. And he calls me and he gives me these ominous words: "Jim, we've been talking." And I'm thinking, that's the words you don't want to hear. That means he's been talking with some folks at Random House and they've got a problem. And I said, all right, what is it? And I was not terribly nice about it. And he said, well, we don't think the title moderator works. And I said, well, that's just too bad, because the title is moderator. And he said, now calm down a minute. Let me just ask you one question. Would you buy a book with a title moderator? I said, okay, let me think about it. Well, I remembered something. And these interviews that I did with the candidates, one of the interviews was with George H.W. Bush. And it was about 7-8 years after he left the White House. It was at his museum library in College Station, Texas. And I asked him a bunch of questions, but one particularly hard-hitting question like, what were they like, those debates, Mr. President? And he said, oh, Jim, I mean, those high visibility things, they are tension city. So now I immediately thought of that, and I called my editor back in New York, and I said, hey, how about Tension City? He said, sold. And that's how it got to be Tension City. And in retrospect, I'm delighted that it was Tension City, because the word, as long as the word tension is in there, because tension is what these things are all about, these debates. And tension from the candidates all the way down to somebody who turns the sound on or forgets to turn the sound on, or everybody in between, because the stakes are so incredibly high. And a quick story. The very first debate I moderated, to illustrate the tension thing, was in 1988 between George H.W. Bush and Michael Dukakis at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And then there was the old format where you had a moderator. Some of you may be old enough to remember this. You had a moderator and you had 3 journalist panelists. Well, we had a closed door meeting. I had a meeting with the other 3 panelists the night before. We went over the kinds of questions we were going to ask and all that sort of stuff. And then the next day, the Secret Service has come to take Kate and me, my wife and me, to the hall for the debate. And I had all that stuff in a binder. And I don't think I literally started shaking, but I had a case of the shakes. And so I said to Kate, I said, my God, I'm just really nervous. I mean, this is, and she didn't literally grab me and throw me against the wall, but she came pretty close. She said, wait just a minute. You think you've got problems? You think you've got the shakes? You've got nervous problems? Think about those 2 men down the road. One false gesture, one misplaced word can cost them the presidency of the United States. For God's sake, get a grip on yourself. And I said, oh, yes, ma'am, sweetheart, baby, thank you. Didn't help a bit, of course. But the important thing there is that everybody involved, and particularly the moderator, and I must say, from my point of view, at least, particularly from the moderator, every time I have moderated a debate, I never, ever lost sight of what this was about. This is not about a television program. This is not about showing off, auditioning for a bigger, better job in public broadcasting or anywhere else. I already still have the best job in television journalism, so that's not what it was about. These are not television shows. These are critical steps in a series of events that lead to the presidency, to the election of the President of the United States, which is the single most important thing that we all do as citizens, is to elect the president every 4 years. And somebody mentioned about how important these things are. Well, let me tell you why I think they're so important, and see if you follow me and agree with me on this. My experience has been these debates always come in late September or October. In this particular case, the ones coming up in the fall of 2012, all 4 of the debates are going to be 3 presidential and 1 vice presidential. They're already pretty much set in terms of places and dates. They're all in the month of October, leading up to the election, the first week in November. That's usually the case. So what this means, I went back and checked all of this preparing my book, and discovered that for the most part, By the time you get to that stage in a presidential campaign, almost 90%, in some cases more than 90% of the people have already decided for whom they're going to vote or are already leaning strongly for one or other candidates. Yet 100 million people watch those debates, any given debate. So why? Well, the reason, I think, is that they want to take the measure of the individual. This is the only time during a campaign where you see the candidates standing side by side, standing together in a comparative way and talking about the same things at the same time. And so even if you're for Billy Bob and you're against Sammy Sue, you still want to know about Sammy Sue, because Sammy Sue might get elected president of the United States, and that means you too, boys and girls. He or she is also going to be president of your country as well. So what happens, in my opinion, and the evidence certainly bears this out, at least the evidence I have looked at, is that you take the measure of the individual. Can you imagine this person sitting behind a desk in the Oval Office, reacting to another 9/11, reacting to another Katrina, making a decision about sending Americans into harm's way? I asked recently, I was fortunate to do it, it wasn't a televised interview, it was for a big meeting. I did a one-on-one interview with Bob Gates, former Secretary of Defense. And remember, he's former head of the CIA. He had worked for 8 different presidents. And I asked him in front of several hundred people, I said, all right, you worked, Secretary Gates, you worked for 8 different presidents. Is there anything that you picked up? It's a great question, something like that. That you picked up about presidents that you think are relevant, that the public should know about in making decisions in electing presidents of the United States. And without a second hesitation, he said, yes, temperament. There's such a thing as presidential temperament. You can smell it, you can see it, you can feel it, you can witness it, and some people have it, some people don't, some people have it different ways. It manifests itself in all kinds of different ways. Of course, then, to digress, I then, of course, tried to say, okay, all right, let's go through the 8 and let's get a read. He said, are you crazy? I'm not about to do that. If I do anything like that, that'll be in my memoir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But that was the point. I mean, Gates was making the point that I was making, that it's you want to know about these people. And like, for instance, that's why when you get down to the specifics, and a lot of these are in my book, where seemingly small things happen but have huge consequences, and you think, well, why was that important? I'll give you an example, my favorite example. It also involves George H.W. Bush. And I don't know, here again, hope you remember this. When he ran for re-election in that would have been, 92, he was opposed by Bill Clinton and by Ross Perot. And I didn't moderate this. I moderated two of those debates, but I didn't moderate this particular one. It was a town hall debate in Richmond, Virginia, and there was the 3 candidates, Bush, Clinton, and Perot, were sitting on stools, and the moderator, who was Carol Simpson of ABC, was standing down here talking to the people, and there was a kind of a relatively wide television shot, and you could see the 3 candidates sitting on the stool. And George H.W. Bush started looking at his watch, like this. And over the course of the debate, he looked at his watch 7 times. Well, the world came down on him. And I asked him in the debate, in the interview I had with him after the one I talked about earlier, I asked him a hard-hitting question like, Mr. President, what was that watch thing all about? And I was sitting, it was a taped television interview. In other words, he's sitting here, I'm sitting there, knees almost touching a camera behind each of us. It was for tape. I mean, it wasn't live or anything. It was for a documentary. And I said, what was the watch thing all about? Well, he leaned across to me and he said, yes, that was really important, wasn't it? Why in the world would you vote for anybody for President of the United States who looks at his watch during a debate. Sir, sir. And I said, Mr. President, some people suggested that you looked at your watch because you were kind of anxious to get it over with. You were bored. I said something stupid like that. And he said, "You're damn right." And then here again, point. He said, "I looked at my watch because I wanted to know how much more time before this crap was over." And then he says to me, "And Jim, you could put that in your documentary." And of course, I waited for him to cool off a minute, and I said, "Mr. President, we just did." Because the camera was running the whole time. Anyhow, I talked to, as I said, I talked to all the candidates about all this stuff. And the best answer I got about all this came from Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton loved talking about, in fact, if Bill Clinton had his way, he and I would still be talking about presidential debate. I mean, it's like, for him, it's talking shop. So he made a point that I think was really, really true. He said, the only reason looking at his watch hurt George H.W. Bush was because there was already a perception in the wind. That's not, remember the grocery scanning thing, turns out not to be really true, but that's neither here nor there. But anyhow, he's disconnected from the American people, doesn't even know how to go through the checkout line at a grocery store, that kind of stuff. And looking at his watch, and Clinton said, that just fed a perception that already existed. And Clinton said, look, if I had looked at my watch, or if Perot had looked at his watch, nobody would have given a damn. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered at all. It's the same thing, the famous Michael Dukakis question when he was asked about Kitty Dukakis, if Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you be in favor of the death penalty for the perpetrator? And you may recall that Dukakis went into a very low-key discussion of capital punishment and his opposition to capital punishment. And that, as Clinton pointed out, the reason that hurt Dukakis because he was already known kind of as a cold fish. And I talked to Dukakis about this in that interview I did with him. And he said, what I should have, yes, he said, in retrospect, I probably should have, if I had my way, I would have grabbed that guy and killed him with my bare hands. But of course, I don't have my way because I'm against capital punishment, and then and shown some emotion. But the fact that he didn't show emotion, here again, fed a prevailing feeling, and it hurt him. You think, well, why? The most recent one that I did, in fact, 2008, Barack Obama and John McCain. It's a long, involved story, but for the first time, they had rules that encouraged the candidates to speak directly to each other. And you could ask each other questions and all that sort of stuff. And so the debate commission people said, well, you're going to, I said, I will do my best. And those of you may remember, I made a complete fool of myself, trying, because I'd ask, McCain would give an answer, and he would never look at Obama. So I kept saying, he would answer the question to me or to the camera, and I would say, well, why don't you say that directly to Senator Obama? And he wouldn't do it. And then I kept trying to get him to do it, and he wouldn't do it. Finally he said, what's the matter? You afraid people can't hear me? So I said, to hell with this. So I quit doing it. But it really hurt McCain, according to the polls. Because here again, it fed that he was a little testy, and he came over like he was dissing Obama. Obama, of course, was very warm, and he kept calling him John, and he did everything. In other words, he did everything. And he came over, and it helped him tremendously. And that was the first time they had ever appeared together. And the preconception here was that here again, picking up on that point, that McCain was testy and angry and all that sort of stuff. And what Obama had to prove, according to the polls going in and all that, was he up to it? Was he calm and cool? Could he handle the thing? Well, so it turned out to be a very positive thing for Obama and a negative thing for McCain. Here again, didn't have anything to do with content. because if you may recall, the financial crisis had just hit. And I switched the subjects and all that sort of stuff, so we talked almost entirely about it, and they wouldn't say a word, either one of them. Every time I'd say, well, what about the, the proposal to do this? Well, the real issue is taxes. I mean, because neither one had a prayer about neither one of them had followed these issues. It was just dumped on them, along with everybody else in the country. The financial crisis was not expected. And that is another point about why these presidential debates are so important. Because let's face it, I bet you all would agree with me that most presidencies are about the unexpected. The campaigns are about the expected. In other words, all right, let's exchange your views on lockboxes for Social Security. And everybody exchanges views during the campaign and even during the debate. And then boom, look at George W. Bush. George W. Bush and Al Gore, by the time they were, and even with John Kerry, there were some differences, but there weren't that many sharp differences. Forget John Kerry, sorry. With Al Gore, there weren't that many sharp differences. He didn't get elected. George W. Bush didn't get elected to do major things. He was just, so at any rate, what is his presidency forever marked by? 9/11, terrorism, et cetera, Iraq. None of that was discussed going in to the 1992 election. Barack Obama, his presidency, as of this moment, and probably forever, whether he's reelected or not, will always be known as the one that had to deal, the presidency that had to deal with the recession, had to deal with the financial crisis. Here again, unexpected. And that's why seeing these people in action is so valuable to individual voters, because you want to know about judgment. You want to know, do you like this person? All kinds of things that you think shouldn't be that important, they turn out to be extremely important. The issue about moderating these things, I have my own little set of rules for moderating presidential debates that some people disagree with. Some people in the business, I think, do. I haven't talked to them about it because I don't care what they think. I take the position, first and foremost, that moderating is that the debates are not about the moderator. And if you're talking after a debate, if somebody's talking about the moderator, even positively, the moderator is screwed up. Nobody should be saying, "Oh God, Larry, your questions were fabulous." No. It's not about the fabulous questions. It's all about the answers. And the homework, I really prepare, and everybody who does this kind of work really prepares. And the reason I prepare, and others who do it prepare so extensively, it isn't for the purpose of writing really nifty questions, because you can sit down and write all kinds of nifty. What you've got to do, and it's hard in that tense environment, you've got to be comfortable enough to listen to the answers. And to be able to do, without any help, just in a split second, hey, that's important, I got to follow up on it. That's old hat, forget it, move on. Or, hey, he said just the opposite 5 years ago. You got to have all that in your head. You can't have it written down. You got to have it in your head. You got to be able to, and you got to be at a comfort zone to be able to do that. And the only way I can get at a comfort zone is just to get all this stuff. The example I give in the book is a made-up example, but it applies to television interviewing as well as debate moderating, where I say, "Senator, do you think we should sell more grain to Cuba?" "Yes, Jim, I think we should sell more grain to Cuba, but before we do that, we should bomb Havana." And I come back with a great follow-up question, which is, "Senator, what kind of grain?" Because that was my next question that I'd written. And if you get into that mode, okay, question, answer, you can miss a lot, to put it mildly. All right, questions, comments, a couple of guidelines on your questions and comments. You go to the middle here, yeah. Okay, hey, great. A couple of guidelines. First guideline is I'm not a pundit. You know what that means? I don't give my opinion. Second guideline is I do not handle criticism well.
And come to the,
What?
come to
Yes,
the
come
mic,
to the
please.
center mic, and if we have trouble hearing, I can repeat it. Go ahead and I'll repeat it if I can hear you.
I think I can be heard.
Okay.
A few nights ago, there was a special, and it was saying that no matter whether he was funny or not, it was the style that he had that won him over. And I'm thinking to myself, in this debate, let's say we're going to have an Obama and a Romney. If Romney even attempted somewhat to be a Johnny Carson-esque type of person, we would laugh at him. He's wearing no tie, jeans. I want to be a casual guy, but he's still Mr. Stiff. Now, and here you have Obama, who's a natural, whether big ears or not. Okay? Now, as a moderator, do you try to neutralize that aspect of their performability so we get right to the core of what the issues are about, or do you say, we'll play on it?
Yeah. For those of y'all didn't hear the question is, when do I plan to return to Gaithersburg? No, his question is a good one, which I'm going to promptly dodge, because it's really not my function. But it's a great question. The question is, there's style problems, there's style differences, not problems, style differences between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And should a moderator do something to kind of deal with that? And the answer is no. Not bad for a straightforward answer. That is not the moderator's job. I'll give you an example of, I moderated all the debates between Gore and George W. Bush in 2000. First one in Boston. That was the one where when Bush was answering a question, Gore was, remember that? It was a split screen, and it really hurt Gore. People who listened to that on the radio thought Gore wiped the floor with Bush, but those people who saw it on television didn't like Gore. It's another one of those examples. It fed a preconceived thing that he was a little bit, unlikable, I guess, and at least the perception. Now, I had one of my rules is now keep in mind that, let's see, I was the closest person, moderator's closest person to the candidate. So be right here that's where George W. Bush was, maybe in the red. You would have been Al Gore, or you could reverse it. Doesn't matter to me. At any rate, when I only look at the person who's talking. So if I was asking Bush a question, and Bush is talking, I never looked at Gore. So when the debate was over, I'm walking out of the hall. So my kids were with me, and my youngest daughter, who was in college, we were walking out of the hall, and she says, "Oh, Dad. Boy, that was something that Gore did." And hell with it, I got some more down here. It's not a problem. And I said, what did Gore do, darling? And she said, well, all that sign and all that grimacing. I mean that's going to be the story of the debate. Because she's a smart kid, well brought up, very intelligent, good genes. And but I was the only person in America who didn't know that had happened, because I was so intent on because the reason is that I don't want to be part of the reaction shot. I don't want to. Somebody's looking at me, and that can influence the way somebody reacts and all of that. So it's a long answer to your question, but my answer was no. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, terrific.
Who do you think was the sharpest debater?
Question was, who do I think is the sharpest debater? I'll give you an honest answer that will appear to be evasive, okay? I think my experience with not just these candidates, in debates, but my experience dealing with people at the upper echelon in American politics, there are very few accidents. whether a person's a conservative or a liberal or a Republican, a Democrat, an independent. You get to that level, you get to be the nominee for president or vice president of the United States. In 99.9% of the cases, they've gone through huge testing. There are very few mistakes made. You just look what happened to the 2012 Republican televised debates. A lot of mistakes were made by those candidates. They couldn't handle certain things, and they got out. They were out of there, just like that. They go through a severe testing. And so and when it's all said and done, I don't really look back on those saying, oh, this person, because everybody's debate style is different as well, because their whole style, they have developed themselves as candidates, as their personas as candidates or as senators or as presidents or vice presidents or whatever their positions are, and they didn't get there by accident, and so I don't really, for instance, some people would argue. And you may feel this way. You know, a question I'm asked a lot is, well, what's the connection between winning a debate, being a good debater, and being a good president? I mean, what? Well, there is no connection because, except for one thing, whether we like it or not, if you're president of the United States and you cannot articulate your views, then forget it. Go apply for another job. And the idea, oh, well, it's all about being on television and being articulate. Yes, that's right. And if you're going to be a bus driver, you better have a driver's license. So does that mean that that's somehow not right? I mean, it is, if the president, any president, wants the people to do something. All right, Mr. and Ms. America, I want you to stand up and go wah-wah or do whatever. You've got to be able to use your words and your personality to get the people, particularly if it's a tough call. You got to persuade them, and you got to be able to do it on television. You got to be able to do it before a large group of people. It's not retail politics anymore, and so the style question becomes important. And as I say, for the most part, sure there are exceptions, but no major exceptions that I dealt with. Where I thought, oh my God, you know, this person can't get his name out without screwing it up. There wasn't any of that kind of stuff. I've never had that feeling that, this person should never be there, because that's not everybody with no exception that I dealt with, I knew why that person got there, and he or she earned it, and the hard way by doing all these things. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
If I could get to the microphone as loud as I can. You said you spent a tremendous amount of time preparing.
Right.
And you talked about tension with everybody. Do you have any insight to the tension and the amount of effort the candidates put into preparing? It sounds like you're doing your own questions.
Yeah.
How much time do they expend?
The question was how much he was talking about my preparation. And how much time do the candidates spend in preparation? It's an enormous amount of time. And what they do is they rehearse. I mean, they'll get into a tent like this and, you know, and have the National Guard, you know, not literally the National Guard, but it will be a very secure area. And they'll pick, you know, some aide to play their opponent. And I love the people that always get to play the moderator. It's usually some truly intelligent, you know, whatever. But they rehearse and they rehearse and they rehearse. And then they go through, well, a couple of them, I did a wonderful interview with Ronald Reagan about his debate experiences. And you remember, first debate he did against Walter Mondale, he lost the debate. And because he lost where he was, and he seemed to be distracted. And the age issue came up naturally because of that. In other words, nobody had raised it before, but because he couldn't get it out, just like I just couldn't right now myself. It happens to all of us, boys and girls. At any rate, I asked him about that. I said, because then he did the second debate with Mondale, and that's when he said, oh, all that wonderful thing, I'm not going to use my opponent's youthfulness, the age, all that kind of, everything he said, and it was dynamite. And so I said, well, what happened? why did you do so well the first time and I mean so poorly the first time and do it? He said, well, that first time he said they over-prepared me. He said they were, oh, you know, well, if somebody says this, you should say this and you should say that, and no, don't say this. No. And he said every time they'd ask me a question, I'd try to kind of go through the Rolodex. Am I supposed to answer that? Or, you know, and he was very honest about it. So what he said after that debate, first debate, he told his folks, leave me alone. I'll either make it or not make it on what I've got in my head and what I can do. Don't give me any more prep. And it made a huge difference. And the problem with the modern day debate, particularly with these formats, that where you get 1 minute, 2 minutes, whatever, you've got to say something, and you've got to and the issue is a lot of candidates, they hear the questions about Social Security. All right, the question may be it may be a specific question, but all the candidate is programmed to say, oh, here's my answer on Social Security. Not the question I asked, by the way, and so you have to give them time to get it out. And you'll notice during the Republican presidential, the nominating debates, there were a lot of times when somebody clearly pushed the belly button and gave an answer for a subject, but the answer wasn't relevant to the question. And so, fortunately, there was time for who I can't remember who the moderator was a couple of times, where they said, yes, but the question was, what day is it, not what the month is, something that elementary. And but it's a fine line for these people, and it's difficult because they know that any little misspeaking can lose them the presidency. And so they work and work and work and work, and sometimes they work too hard, Yes, ma'am.
Yes. How different do you think debates would be without an audience?
Question is a debate. How different would a debate be without an audience? I really believe very strongly, and I agree with the debate commission, and I help them in the debates that I have moderated, is to make sure that the audience understands why they are there. They are there as an audience, as a silent audience. They are there as invited guests. They are not participants. I had, what I always did the first time, I had a problem, and the debate commission said, hey, can we do something about this? I said, sure, I'll figure something out. So I stood up in front of an audience. This was I can't remember where it was. It was one of the first debates I moderated. And I said, all right, I gave him the spiel. I said, I don't want anybody saying a word. I don't want any applause. I don't want any hissing. I don't want any booing. I want absolute silence, because this isn't about you, ladies and gentlemen. This is for the audience out there. You are not participating. And then I said, if anybody does this, I'm going to, and continues to do this, I am, first of all, stop the debate. I'm going to stop the debate, turn around, and hold you up to public ridicule in front of everybody you went to Sunday school with, everybody, whatever. And then I'm going to take the time away from your candidate. In other words, if you cheer your candidate, I'm going to take the time away from your candidate. And then I had a stroke of genius, because they're on the front row, so clearly it would involve one of the Bushes, because Barbara Bush was sitting down there in the front row. And I just spontaneously said, Mrs. Bush, can I recruit you to monitor and police the hall? And she said, you bet! And I promise you could hear a pin drop in that entire debate. Now, you see what happened during the Republican thing. The audience became part of the exercise. And those candidates got where they would play to the applause line, and in my opinion, that is not good. If you want to have a political rally, have a political rally, but don't call them debates. And it's up to the sponsoring organizations. Most of them are cable news organizations, but they also have co-sponsors that are political interest groups, and they want to show their thing. My hope is that when they do the primary debates in 2016, whether the Republicans or Democrats, that they will try to monitor that better, because I think that's it's a great thing for people to come and sit there but hush. All right. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, say that again. No. Question is about wives and/or spouses debating. I can't imagine that ever happening. It would be considered. I mean, there's a lot of people think even having vice presidents debate is irrelevant. I think nobody would vote for or against. And first of all, what would a spouse be free to say? It would have to be almost non-issue oriented. So then, what's the point? And I think, back-to-back interviews, that kind of thing, fine. But to have them debate, I think, my husband knows more about Social Security than your husband does. Or to put it another way, my wife knows more about, I just don't think I don't think that's going to happen. And I'm not sure it would be a good idea if it did. Okay. Thank you very much. Remember what I said. If you don't remember anything else that I said here this last magnificent hour, you should, wherever you go and whenever you go, always, please, never, ever forget your baggage. Thank you.